a moment for everyone to join into the webinar before we begin. So welcome everyone to the August Business Series presented by PNC. I'm Elaine Bunnell, Director of Downtown Inc., part of the York County Economic Alliance. And I don't know about you, but this is one of those days where I'm happy to be having this webinar virtually. It's rainy where I am and cloudy, and so I hope that wherever you're joining us from, you are safe and dry. And so we invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea and settle in. We have some really important information to share with you this morning. We're going to be talking about how to access CARES Act funding, specifically through the Yoko Strong Restart Fund, and how those businesses can be valuable to small businesses in recovering from COVID. And we have invited Silas Chamberlain, Vice President of Economic and Community Development with the York County Economic Alliance, to take us through some of that information this morning. So he'll give a presentation and we'll save plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So we'd invite you to, as you are listening to the presentation and the information, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat feature also if you'd like to make a comment, request information. But before we get into the information on the Yoko Strong Restart Fund, we've invited Commissioner Julie Wheeler, President of the York County Board of Commissioners, to join us and to provide a welcome and introduction. So thank you, Commissioner Wheeler, for joining us.
You are quite welcome. Thank you, Elaine. Welcome, everybody. And unfortunately, I am in the office today. So I did get the umbrella out and it is raining, but I do like the rain because when it rains, the grass grows and the flowers bloom. I won't spend a lot of time. I just wanted to welcome you. I think that most of you are aware that the county received $40.50 million in CARES funding from the federal government via the state. York County was not one of the counties that was in direct receipt of funding from the federal government because we didn't meet the proposed guideline of having 500,000 or more residents. So we're certainly very thankful that we did receive money through the state of $40.5 million. What we're here to talk about today is a small grant program that we've put in place working with the York County Economic Alliance and the Community First Fund. The commissioners allocated $10 million to the grant fund for small businesses and $4 million for nonprofits. With the small grant fund, we will be given priority to those businesses who did not receive the personal paycheck protection, as well as priority to those organizations like restaurants, hair salons, and barbers, who we know have been majorly impacted on the front lines there by the pandemic. Today, we have a commissioners meeting and we'll be making, in all likelihood, making some more announcements about additional CARES funding. Just to give you a quick rundown of what we've done so far. I just mentioned the grant program. We also allocated up to $150,000 to do 2 feasibility studies, one around broadband access and connectivity in our community, and another around a countywide health department. Both of these were recommendations that came out of the Yoko Strong Recovery Task Force report. The Board of Commissioners has been utilizing that report to guide us in how we allocate the CARES funding. We had a lot of community leaders and residents participate in that report, and we're really using that to guide us as we make these decisions. We've taken a phased approach. We're not allocating it all at one time. We want to make sure we're fair and equitable and purposeful in how we allocate the funding. So in addition to the 2 feasibility studies, last week we announced that we were making some direct allocation to tourism and cultural arts, as well as some direct allocation to nonprofits. Those nonprofits are not eligible to participate in the grant program, and those were nonprofits that actually would not meet the requirements for the small grant program. They were nonprofits that service basic support and service needs in our community. So nonprofits whose mission is around food, shelter, and transportation. And I think we can all, whether we're new residents to York County or we lived through our life, the York Fair has been a part of our history and legacy. And this will be the first year since 1918 that we've not had a countywide fair. So the York Fair was a recipient of some direct funding. So today we'll be making some more announcements regarding additional funding, some more to come. But I'm going to turn it over to Silas, who's going to get into the details about the application process. Want to stress to everyone, this is not going to be first come, first serve. So you don't need to panic if you don't get your application in day one, or if you get it in and we ask you to make some modifications. So it's not first come, first serve. So please don't panic. And Silas, Elaine, Katie, the whole team at the Economic Alliance is here to help and guide you through that. So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye and get ready for the commissioners meeting and turn it over to Silas.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Wheeler. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for being on. I promise we'll get right into the details of the Restart Fund and what's available and how you can apply. Again, keep in mind you can use the Q&A function or the chat function to ask questions along the way. And also keep in mind that yokostrong.org is a clearinghouse for all the information you're going to see today, and that you'll also receive a recording of this webinar as a participant. So don't feel like you have to be taking notes and capturing all this information. There's plenty of other ways that you can look at it after the presentation's over. So again, Julie touched on this, but the county received $40.5 million from the federal government and has allocated $10 million for small business support and $4 million for nonprofit support. We are going to make grants available of up to $35,000 with no minimum, but a maximum of $35,000. And keep in mind that for this entire program, the eligible expenses, and we're going to go into more detail about what they are, must be related to COVID-19. They must either be something that you were forced to do or something that you lost as a result of COVID-19 and the business restrictions, and that you'll have to document that as part of this process. Also keep in mind that the federal government and our state government has designated the period of eligible expenses as being March 1st through the end of this year. So it includes both expenses you've already incurred and losses you already experienced, and going forward, expenses that you anticipate having up until the end of 2020. So fairly expansive in terms of the timeline that we're talking about. We really want to hammer home the point that this is not a loan, this is a grant program. So unlike even the PPP program that some of you are familiar with, this isn't a forgivable loan. This is just a grant. You will not be asked to pay back these grants. And because they are grants, there's no underwriting process that you would have in a typical loan process. And therefore, we're able to streamline the application and make it a little more simple for those who are applying. Applications will open the week of August 24th online. It'll be a totally online process, and it will remain open for 10 days. We are using the term week of August 24th because we're really working to nail down the exact date that the portal will open. We're working to actively code the site right now and create the portal. So that's very much a project that's underway. We're looking late the week of August 24th, but you'll be notified when it actually opens. And then, as Julie said, it will remain open for 10 whole days before any ranking or awarding of grants occurs. So if you've tried to apply for grants in the past from state or federal government, some of those programs were first come, first served. The portal was crashing in the first couple of days because of everybody trying to get in at the first second. And then in some cases, the grant programs were oversubscribed before the portal even closed, meaning many more times the amount of people had already received, had already applied for the funds that were available before the portal was even closed. So we will leave it open for 10 full days, business days, and then we will close it, and then the ranking of the grants and the awards will occur. The final bullet there is a reminder that a lot of this is self-certification. So we'll be asking you questions about your gross revenue, your losses, your expenses, the kind of business you are, and you'll have to certify that those things are true in the same way you do on your taxes or any other process where if the IRS or the federal government ever did an audit on this program, then there is a potential you'd be asked to prove if those things were true and accurate. And so just keep in mind, these are flexible grant funds, but there is an accountability piece of it as well. So what can the grant funds be used for? Again, think creatively and expansively about what a COVID-19 related expense is. It could be payroll costs, the costs related to the continuation of group healthcare benefits, including paid sick, medical, or family leave and insurance premiums. So if you kept your employees on, but your revenue was way down and you weren't able to cover all those expenses, you could be reimbursed for those expenses. Working capital for the purpose of paying mortgage, principal, and interest payments. So, you know, if you had been paying your mortgage during this period and you were unable to make those payments because of your lower revenue, or you had to go into debt to make those payments, then that's an eligible expense. But you are not able to prepay mortgage payments. So if you were been paying your mortgage all along and you're thinking, well, I'll just apply for money now so that I can get ahead in 2021, that would not be an eligible expense. Rent payments and utility payments are eligible. We think these will be popular ones because we know even when businesses were totally closed, rent and utility payments were still a cost that most of us were incurring. Working capital for the purpose of covering the costs of reopening business operations after being partially closed due to state mandated business closures. And keep in mind, as long as these expenses were incurred due to COVID-19. And then I think the final one will be a category that a lot of people are interested in. Any expenses, cost incurred related to the expense of implementing COVID-19 related changes to your business. So if you purchase specialized equipment, if you purchase those plastic barriers at your checkout or between portions of your business, if you bought PPE, so gloves, masks, sanitizer, if you've brought in a special cleaning crew to sanitize your business, if you did employee training around how to adapt to compliance with the CDC guidelines, if you changed your business physically, so if you had to remove tables in your restaurant or create outdoor dining in your restaurant, or if you had to remove some of your shelving or your product to create more space for social distancing. Any of those physical changes, as long as they were things you did as a response to COVID-19 or restrictions put in place by the federal and state government, are all eligible for this program. You would just need to be able to document what those expenses have been. So unlike a lot of grant programs, for this one, you will not be asking for a specific grant amount. You won't say, I need $15,687. What you'll be doing is telling us what your revenue is in a normal year, what your losses have been, and what your costs have been. And then you will fall into one of these categories. So if you're a relatively small business and your annual revenue is less than $100,000 a year, you would qualify for what your expenses and losses were in that $0 to $10,000 range. For anybody above 100,000, you'd be falling into these other categories. So for example, if you're a larger business and your annual revenue is between $1 million and $3 million, then you would tell us what your losses, what your annual revenue was. That would put you into that category, and then you would receive a $35,000 grant if you were selected. The whole point of doing it this way, instead of having you tell us exactly what it is, what your need is so that we're not putting applicants in the position of trying to second guess themselves to say, well, I need 35,000, but I know they're not going to give out a bunch of big grants, so let me ask for 5, or vice versa. It takes that calculus out of it and just allows you to tell us in an objective manner what your revenue was, what your losses were, and then you would fit into one of these categories. And if you, and this is true of all this information, but in this one in particular, if you have questions about how that works and where your business would fit in, just reach out to us directly and we can give you some guidance on where you'd be falling on that chart and what anticipated grant you could expect. So now a little bit of detail about the for-profit business side of the grant fund in particular. So again, grants are available up to $35,000. We did put in place a cap on this to try to focus on small businesses, truly small businesses. Some of you might be familiar that the federal designation is 500 or fewer employees for a small business. We think that's a little bit large in the context of the businesses we're working with. So we put in place a cap on revenue of $3 million annual gross revenues and having fewer than 50 full-time equivalent employees. For restaurants, we changed that a little bit because restaurants have a little different business model, and restaurants continue to be significantly impacted on a daily basis by the restrictions that are still in place. So for restaurants, there is no cap on annual revenue, and the cap on a full-time equivalent employees is 75. So a little bit more leeway there because you're employing so many people throughout a given year. Eligible applicants must operate primarily in York County, and they must file a Pennsylvania tax return. And we say operate primarily in York County. We mean that 51% or more of your business must be done in York County. We've also applied some prioritization to try to ensure that businesses who have been left behind by previous state and federal programs can be served through this program. I'll say right at the beginning, these are not requirements, these are funding priorities. So people that meet these criteria will receive some prioritization in the process. But if you're looking at this and saying, my business doesn't meet any of those criteria, then you should still apply. We anticipate that businesses that do not meet this criteria still have a good shot at being funded through the program. So we'll be prioritizing small businesses who did not receive financial support through programs such as the Small Business Association's Payroll Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, or the state-based COVID Working Capital Assistance Program. Businesses impacted the most financially based on gross revenue losses will receive some prioritization. That sort of makes sense since this is intended to help businesses that have had losses due to COVID. So the more you lost, the better you'll be ranked. Historically disadvantaged businesses, and we're using the federal designation there, as businesses that are 51% or more owned and operated by people of color. Small businesses owned and operated by low to moderate income business owners will also receive some priority. And another factor that's implicit within that, because it's not just who owns and operates, it's who the business is serving. There will be some prioritization given on geography based on federal criteria about low to moderate income census tracts in York County. And if you are a business located in the city of York, anywhere in the city of York, you'll receive some bonus points just based on that criteria alone. And again, that's intended to support Main Street businesses serving our historic downtowns, our city, and our boroughs throughout the county. We've also prioritized several industry sectors who have been hit the hardest by COVID restrictions: the food and the hospitality sector, the retail sector, tourism, health and wellness, and personal care. For personal care, think things like beauty and nail salons, spas, and barbershops who have had to take significant actions to purchase PPE and make changes to their business models to be able to function. And again, a reminder that these are not requirements, and it doesn't preclude other people from applying. In fact, we encourage you to apply even if you don't meet any of those criteria. So nonprofit restart eligibility. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I do want to make you aware that there's $4 million available for nonprofits. We've done a number of presentations focused on the nonprofit community. So if you're on the board of a nonprofit, associated with a nonprofit, think there's a nonprofit that has had some losses and expenses that could benefit from the program, make them aware of the Restart Fund. Again, the grants are up to $35,000 for COVID-related expenses. The cap on revenue is the same, so $3 million cap on annual gross revenue, and fewer than 75 full-time equivalent employees for nonprofits. Again, they must be based in York County and have a primary service area of York County, and they'll have to submit a 990 to show their revenue. We do have some processes in place if they don't have a 990, and we could talk that through with them. And for this program, and this is dictated by the federal government and DCD at a state level, only 501c3s, which is the most common form of nonprofit, and 501c19s, which are veteran organizations, are eligible to apply. There are C4s and C6s active in York County. The Economic Alliance is one of them, who are not eligible to apply for this fund because of their nonprofit designation. So if you visit yokostrong.org, there's an extensive checklist that shows you everything that you can be preparing now so that when that 10-day window opens, you'll be prepared to apply. But a couple of things to keep in mind that you might want to start working on now. We'll need your most recent completed tax return filed, and that must be in an electronic format. That can be PDF, or you can do a JPEG. So if you don't have access to a scanner, you can always take a photo with your phone. We know it's a little more complicated that way. There's also some apps that you can use to take a photo on your phone that'll convert to PDF, but you don't necessarily have to have it in an electronic format now. Just try to work on that by the time the application period opens. This is an important note for businesses that may be relatively new. If the applicant was not in business as of the beginning of 2020. So if you have not filed a tax return yet and you don't have any tax information you can share with us, then it is okay. You can still apply. And you would just need to prepare a management prepared profit and loss statement that shows your revenue from the time you were created in 2019 up to in 2020, so that we have some documentation of what your revenue is, what expenses you have, and that can be a stand-in for your taxes. We do have a template available if you have never had to create a profit and loss statement before. That makes it pretty easy to go through and plug in your information into the template. And we also have a couple community partners who are standing by to offer that technical assistance, that have either training in preparing those kinds of profit and loss statements for grants, or have an accounting background or a banking background. And we've done a number of webinars too that have been focused on this P&L. So if that's an issue for you and you're thinking, oh no, I don't have my most recent tax returns and I haven't ever done a P&L before, don't let that be a barrier to applying. We can help you figure that out. You'll also have to include a copy of an official filing with the Department of State or your local municipality. And again, that must be digital. Only one of those certificates that's listed is required. So your articles of incorporation, your certificate of organization, your fictitious name or DBA registration, and or your government issued business license. And then of course, photo ID in a PDF or JPEG format to prove that you own this business and you have the right to apply on behalf of it. So another thing that you'll need to do is verify your business name. And we've tried to make this as easy as possible. The website where you can do this is listed on this page. And again, some of you may have this document already and don't even have to take this step. If you've never had to go and look up your documentation before, it costs $6. You can order it online. It'll be emailed to you within a couple of days. So again, this is the kind of thing that if you don't have this form, then take a look at this page in particular, go and apply for it and get it in your email now, so that when the portal opens, you're not waiting 2 days just to get this one document so that you can apply. But this is a pretty critical thing that you need as part of your application, so we know that you have a legal business. And we need to know the business name, the official business name, so that we can cut a check if you're selected for your grant. So again, if you have questions about this one in particular, feel free to reach out to our team and we can always answer questions on it. The number one thing that you can do right now is visit yokostrong.org. This really is the one spot where it's trying to capture all the information on the Restart Fund. There is assistance available in Spanish, and almost all the documentation that we're uploading has a bilingual version, and the website itself can be translated into multiple languages. So please don't let language be a barrier either to applying. When you go to the site, you'll be able to sign up to receive grant alerts. That's the way that we'll communicate with you about when the grant portal opens, when it's closing, and any other critical information about the grants. You can also review all the information that I just shared today in even more detail And there's a checklist to show you all the things you can do to get ready to apply. So as soon as that portal's open, you're not scrambling, you're sitting there with all the information you need and you can apply within that 10-day period. We'll also list all the other resources that are available to you, the names of our staff who are working on this program. There's several of them, and past webinars that you can view too if you're interested in a specific topic. For example, we've had webinars just focused on the personal service sector, like nail salons and barbershops. So if you want to check out any of those resources, you can go to yokostrong.org. So with that, I know that's a lot of information. I see we have some questions that have come in and some information in the chat, and I'll let Elaine maybe facilitate that.
Yes, thank you, Silas. That was a lot of really good information, valuable information to help our businesses prepare to apply for the Restart Fund. And we do have several questions, so I'm just going to start at the top of the queue. Are these grants available to sole proprietorships?
Yes, thanks to whoever asked that. Yes, they're available to sole proprietorships. They're available to pretty much any business model. So there is no limit on how small the business can be. You do not need to have employees. If you're a sole proprietor and you can document what your revenue was last year, what it was this year, so that we know what the difference has been, and if you've had any expenses that you've incurred directly in terms of purchasing equipment or PPE or anything like that, you're definitely eligible for this fund and encouraged to apply.
And I think you touched on this next question a little bit, but maybe we can delve a little bit deeper into documents to prepare. What if I haven't filed my 2019 taxes? I filed for an extension. What can I provide?
So in that case, you would be providing a profit and loss sheet, and that's the stand-in for having your actual tax return, because really your tax return is a summary of your revenue for the year. And that's what you'll have to recreate with that profit and loss sheet. If you have your 2018 return, then you'd be able to use that as a basis as well. But if your question is based on the fact that you don't have it, you didn't file because this was your first year filing, or it's just a little late, then a profit and loss statement can fill in for that. And if you submit a prepared profit and loss, we won't come back to you and say, like, why didn't you show us your tax returns? It's really an either or, but if you have your tax returns, that's by far the easiest.
And as you mentioned, that's a template that we can certainly provide. So if you need a template for a profit and loss, please just contact us through, as Silas said, the website phone number that's listed on yokostrong.org.
Elaine, I think in fact, when we send out the recording of this webinar, preemptively include that template in it so that it's available to everybody that's on this call.
Okay, absolutely, will do. Let's see. Next question is, I do not have payroll. My team are part-time contractors. Is my business still eligible for the grant?
So if yes, you're still eligible for expenses that you've incurred and your business has incurred. If your individual employees are contracted, then they would have to apply individually themselves for their specific losses. So if, the example of maybe a barbershop, I don't know what the particular business is, but a barbershop, if you had bought PPE, if you had spaced out your stations to give more social distancing, you as the owner of that business could apply for those expenses. But if one of your individual barbers had losses from being closed, they would apply and show what their revenue was last year compared to this year and apply for those expenses themselves. So in theory, you could have multiple people applying from that same business because they are independent businesses in and of themselves, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that question came up on our webinar specifically to the beauty industry. So I just want to reiterate that if you are owner of a barbershop, you can apply for losses related to your COVID expenses, but you may also have barbers or stylists who rent a chair who may have experienced losses, and they can apply independently. Is that what I understand you're saying, Silas?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question, is income loss as a percentage of gross income meant by gross income loss? It seems a $1,000 loss compared to a $10,000 loss is more injurious depending on the size of the business.
Right. I mean, yes, I think you're gonna rank well if you're a small business. If you're under 100,000 in revenue and you lose 10% of that, you're going to, as well as a business that's 3 million and loses, you know, tens of thousands. So it is based on the relative size of your business as well. Otherwise, you're right. The smaller businesses wouldn't have any ranking relative to the larger businesses. The same goes with expenses, frankly. You know, obviously the high expenses for a relatively small business is in some ways a greater hardship than the same number of expenses for a $3 million business. So that will be given consideration as part of the process. The issue that we run into a little bit with trying to process, you know, we're anticipating there's 14,000 businesses in York County. With the parameters we put in place on, you know, the maximum revenue, the size of employees, we estimate that there's 10,000 eligible for this program. If we compare to Lancaster County, they've seen somewhere like 6,000 applicants, 4,000 to 6,000 applicants. So even if we're on the lower end of that, we're processing 4,000 applications in a couple-week time span. So some of these things are sort of objective, automated rankings, and then others are a little bit more like the size of the business compared to the losses or the expenses that they've incurred. So it's mostly science, but there's also a bit of an art to it too. And that's why we've partnered with Community First Fund, who's an expert in micro lending and grants, to help walk us through that.
Great. And as you said, you showed that sliding scale of how, as you said, with that evaluation process with the application, and also in the FAQs. You'll receive it in the PowerPoint that we'll send, as Silas mentioned, after this to everyone who registered. But certainly when you go to yokostrong.org, there's a FAQ section, and you'll see that grid as well. So let's keep going. We have several more questions, and I want to make sure that we get to all of them. Are losses associated with products going bad and closure eligible? For example, food inventory at a restaurant, and if insurance didn't cover that inventory loss from spoilage?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you had an inventory in place and then the business restrictions went into place and you could not sell any of your food, then that's an eligible expense. As long as you can tie it back to COVID-19 or the business restrictions. Again, we're not going to ask you in the application, say, okay, specifically, how did, you know, when did you buy the food? When did it go bad? When did the business restrictions go in place? As long as you know that that was due to COVID and the restrictions on your business, then that's an eligible expense. And that's sort of a very easy one because that's a tangible loss. You can probably pull up your receipts and know exactly how much you paid for the food and how much you did use and how much you didn't use, and document that, and you're good to go. So yes, that's definitely eligible.
Great, and I think that's one of the benefits of this particular grant program, Silas, that it is broad in terms of the uses and those who are eligible compared to some of the other programs. Mm-hmm. The next question, what happens if you are not required to have a fictitious name, for example, if you're a sole proprietorship?
So the fictitious name DBA was just one of the ways that you could document your business. So if you have a business license, if you have articles of incorporation, if you have documentation of your LLC, anything that you have that documents that you are a business, really for the sole purpose of saying, not having individuals apply to a grant program when they don't really run a business. Anything that you can document, and we have a list of all those different forms on the website and in the Q&A, then you would just supply that instead. So, and if there is a situation where you don't have any of those, still don't let that be a barrier to applying. Reach out to us and we'll figure out what can stand in for that document.
Absolutely. As a very small sole proprietor, I do not have a separate business account. Does this mean I'm ineligible for any grant money? Because if the grant, it would have to be deposited into a personal account, not to an account with a business name. And I know Grace Corte, our board member, who's a CPA, addressed this, but if you could answer that question also.
Yeah, I mean, it does not mean you're ineligible to apply. You can still apply for this program. You will need to document, you'll have to be able to separate out your personal finances from your business finances for the purpose of your profit and loss. And that is something that Grace Corte or our staff or another one of our community experts who are helping us can help you walk through. When it comes to cutting the check, I think it's going to be whichever name is associated with your business. So again, back to that previous question, if you're a sole proprietor and you don't have a DBA and your name is, associated with a business, I think there's an easy way to work around that and still get you the funding. So again, don't let that be a barrier to applying. We can help with both parts of that and help figure out what makes the most sense for you. Just make sure you email us or give us a call to figure that out.
Great, and we will share that information again. You'll receive it in the replay, and I'll share it before we close out today's conversation. Lots of questions rolling in. Thank you, everybody. We love having this discussion and dialogue because I know it's going to help everybody. So keep adding your questions. Can the grant be used as capital to acquire technical assistance, to expand online presence, acquire necessary inventory to assist with expanding?
So as long as everything you just described is in response to COVID-19. So if you if you're hiring a consultant to help you build a website or somebody to help you market your goods better in a different way than you did prior to COVID-19 because of restrictions on your retail operations or some other piece of your business, that's all eligible. So the quintessential example of that is a retail establishment that had a brick and mortar storefront in downtown York. When the business restrictions went into place, they started shifting more of their business online. They had to spend money to build up a website and to be able to take online payments. And then, have since then continued that business line. That's all an eligible expense because it was triggered by COVID-19. It was a way for you to keep your business viable despite the business restrictions. And there's a cost affixed to it. So yeah, all that sounds like it's eligible expenses. Okay,
great. Next question. We are the American Legion. We have an office. We have our office fill everything, and can we try this one? We tried another grant and and we got it. They came back and told us we didn't. Okay, so looks like they filled out an application, submitted it. They thought they were going to receive funding. It doesn't specify which program. And then it turns out they didn't receive the funding. I've heard this several times that businesses, we understand that this application process is time consuming, and some people who haven't had luck with other programs are really not sure whether they should, spend the time applying here. I think in summary, that's what the question is asking.
Sure. I'm obviously biased, but I would say yes, still apply. I'm not sure off the top of my head what legal designation an American Legion is. So if you're a nonprofit and you are a C4 or C6, then you could technically be precluded from applying to this because of what's been passed down by the federal government to us. And there's a number of different kinds of organizations in that boat. If you're a C3 or a C19, or if you're on a for-profit business model, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't be eligible to apply with the same caveat that everybody else is going through, which is as long as you can tie back, loss of revenue because of COVID-19, fundraisers that were canceled, expenses that you had in improving your space or buying PPE for the Legion, any of those would be eligible. The only thing that would be tricky is figuring out what your legal designation is. if you file a 990 or not, if you're a nonprofit, you know, and if you want to reach out directly to me or to any of our staff, we can walk you through that and figure out if you're eligible to apply. And if you are, definitely worth the time because you would have eligible expenses as part of the program.
And as you mentioned, even for nonprofits, any entity established in the Commonwealth, they can go and do that search on that website, and it should give you information about designation. So whether it's active or inactive, which is very important. And as I mentioned, we can help with that.
Right. And an American Legion or like a YMCA are good examples where there's a national organization there as well, but each of those independent branches are typically their own legal entity. So that's where we're saying, like, even though you're part of this much larger thing, if you're based in York County, 51% of your membership or more in York County, 51% or more of your work is in York County, and you file your own taxes or you have your own financials, you should be eligible to apply, even if you're associated with, you know, a much larger entity.
And thank you. You answered another question that was coming up in the queue, which was exactly that they are a local chapter of a larger organization. And so because their operations are specific to York County, if that's the case, then they would be eligible as a chapter, it sounds like what you're saying.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. The next question, I have a Schedule C for my entertainment business, but have not received my LLC filing yet. I applied last month for it and started my business last year. Can I still apply?
You should be able to apply as long as you were in operation prior to the onset of COVID, which I think for that purposes, they're saying February 15th, 2020. So as long as you were in business prior to that, you can still apply. What that documentation is that'll be acceptable, that's what we would have to figure out with you. And if you don't have your LLC, it's clearly not that. So reach out to us and we'll figure out how to document that. But technically, you should be able to apply because you're already in operation. And if you have a Schedule C and everything, you should be good. Really what they're trying to head off is anybody that created a business after COVID and the restrictions began from applying, because then clearly you're opening a business during the pandemic, really hard to document what your losses are versus your normal operating. So in the case of a business that was already open prior to COVID, that should be eligible, yeah.
Great. The next question, when will you announce the selected businesses that are awarded grants? And I think this is a great point to reiterate about who will actually be making the decision. Silas, I'll let you take that.
Absolutely. So all the grants, you know, obviously the portal is open for 10 days. That puts us into early September. And then it takes about 2 weeks from the time the portal closes to do all the rankings, which again, a lot of that happens automatically based on information provided. And then we sort of use our vendor, Community First Fund, to go in and just almost like fact check it to make sure there's nothing that like a business slipped through that has revenues of $5 million and they're somehow on the list. So really just to look at it for accuracy. And then it will be the county commissioners that receive that list of businesses, and it will rank all the businesses. And as far as we can stretch $10 million down on that list, that will be for the for-profit and the same on the nonprofit side. So it is a pretty objective process. Ultimately, the county commissioners are the ones awarding the money. So in theory, they could say, you know, this business doesn't meet our criteria, but we don't anticipate that. We am following a pretty similar process to what happened in Lancaster, where they went through their process. They presented the list to the county commissioners and the county commissioners approved it. We anticipate that that'll happen then, you know, late September. And by late September or the first week of October is when you would see checks being cut directly to businesses. And really, I'm saying checks being cut. A lot of them are direct deposits into accounts. So that will happen pretty quickly. But we've been working on a process that have said 30 business days from the time our portal opens. That still sounds pretty ambitious to me, given what we've seen from the federal government and the state government, that we'd be able to speed ours up. But we are working with vendors who are experienced in it and have done it before. So that's the goal. So if you're thinking in your mind, think like end of September, early October for actually getting the funds. And
Okay.
maybe a couple weeks before that to be notified that you're going to be a recipient.
Okay, so end of September, early October is the hope in terms
Right.
of actual disbursement of funds. And I think it's worth reiterating, as you said, Silas, that there is confidentiality within the process, and also the integrity of the application being scored based on the evaluation criteria, that it's not a business name associated with it, that each application is assessed and assigned a personal ID number. So
Right.
and the commissioners are making those decisions, and the board of commissioners solely, it's based on the merit of the application and the need.
Right. So
Yes.
for better or worse, after that application goes in, we could love your business a lot. It could be a personal favorite, and we're not going to be able to advocate on behalf of it because it's an objective process and your name won't even be affixed to it until it comes back to the commissioners so that they can make those deposits. So, for better or worse, that's why we're doing as much outreach as we can on the front end, encouraging as many businesses to apply as we can, because after that point, it's sort of out of our hands.
Mm-hmm. Another question. I was using my personal vehicle for my contractor business, but had to stop due to COVID and possibly spreading to my family. Can I use grant funds to acquire a vehicle to get up and running again?
I would say probably, yeah. I mean, I think if your business was based on using a vehicle and your precaution is that that you're purchasing a vehicle, I think that you would reach out to us to discuss that, because part of what needs to happen is funds have to be expended by the end of this year, and you can't sort of prepay on something that you're going to benefit from in the future. So I guess the point would be, maybe the state would push back and say, can you lease a car for the remaining of the year? Can you rent a car? Could you have it sanitized periodically or something? We would probably want to double check that with the state just to make sure that you wouldn't get in any hot water down the road for purchasing a vehicle through it. But I think if it's critical to your business and it sidelined you up to this point, and that would be an expense that would allow you to get back into business, I think in theory that would be an eligible expense. We would just want to double vet that one, because I can say that's the first time we've gotten that question.
Mm-hmm. I think we have answered all of the questions that currently are in the Q&A. If there's a question that we didn't answer, or you still have questions, we have a few more minutes. We welcome you to send us any comments or questions that you might have. In the meantime, I just want to share a couple of things. As Silas mentioned, if you registered for this event, you'll receive an email following up to this with a replay of this, with a link that you can share with other businesses who you think might benefit. We'll also include the template that Silas mentioned for preparing a P&L. Also, save the date for September 16th, which is our next business series workshop, presented again by PNC, and we're thankful for their sponsorship and allowing us to bring all this great information to you. If there's a topic that you're interested in hearing, we're ready to adapt that schedule of topics. We, of course, created a whole year's calendar before COVID, and now, we need to be nimble. We want to be here to support the community in the restart and recovery effort. So if there's a topic that you want to hear about or hear more about that we've talked about earlier in the year, please drop us a note and let us know. We'd appreciate that. There may be one other question here. Can the grant be used to acquire storage space for my mobile business that I lost?
Yes, I think that's an eligible expense. Again, as long as the loss of your business was due to COVID and the storage would temporarily help in getting you back to business again. Again, because they want you to be spending the funds by the end of the year, and you can't really prepay on something to get like a year-long rental of a mobile space, because they would say, well, that's, you're prepaying the next 8 months or so into 2021. But if you wanted to rent space from now until the end of December, and you were using that to store something that's going to help you get back into business, then I think that would be an eligible expense.
Okay, great. What about revenue losses from festivals my business was supposed to attend but were canceled due to COVID? And I believe what you said earlier, Silas, is you can use that. If you paid for space or rental space at an event that didn't happen, you can be reimbursed for those, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to use it for events beyond the end of this year. Is that accurate?
That's right. Yeah. And if you typically in a year go to, say there's 4 key events that you attend, and that's responsible for 80% of your revenue, and this year you were able to go to 1 or none, then that's your loss from 2019 to 2020. And that's, if you have that loss and you still have expenses, like you're buying product, or you had any other expenses, then you could document that loss and be reimbursed for it. So the same way that a business being closed in a brick and mortar location didn't have people walking through the door, you as someone who's at a festival selling a product, if that's what your scenario is, you were cut off from your patrons. And so that's a loss that you could document. And the way that you would document that is through showing your annual revenue, comparison between the 2 years.
So that's an important point of clarification. So you can document what you paid. If you paid $200 for that booth space that you normally do, that in 2019 you sold $500 in goods, you would list both of those as losses. Okay.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Important clarification.
Yeah.
And I think the last question we have before we wrap up, if you are a small business and have done the best you're able to do with limited funds to create a safe environment to interact with your customers, such as PPE, can you ask for help to make your precautions more secure, like plexiglass versus, some people are just using sheer plastic shower curtains to create barriers. Can you use that to make important upgrades?
Yes, and that's actually a very straightforward one. If you are buying something and you have an expense because you're trying to limit the spread of COVID, you're trying to protect patrons or employees, that's a very clear eligible expense under this program. You would just have to document what those expenses are going to be, and then you'd be able to apply for reimbursement.
And just to follow up, and this is an important point for everyone on the call, the individual who asked about using their personal vehicle, how can we can certainly follow up with that person about that specific question related to their business, but also there's a phone number for anyone if you'd like to have more conversation specifically to aspects of your business. You can call 717-718-7845, or you can email info@yocostrong.org, YOCO strong.org. And we can help you, because I know there are some intricacies, obviously, that are very specific to the individual in that business, and we can't answer all of it here, but absolutely, yes, we can get you an answer about the use of personal vehicle to make sure that, as Silas said, we want you to be successful. We don't want to get you in any trouble. So we'll help you navigate that for sure. Silas, is there anything else that you want to say to wrap up? We just have a couple minutes. I know you've gone through this process with PPE and some of the other programs. Anything you just want to share with people as final thoughts?
I would just, again, reiterate that you can't get a grant if you don't apply. So if you've been discouraged in the past by some of the other programs, I can definitely apply, because none of these grant programs are perfect, including our own. But I do think, because this is focused on York County, it's $10 million that isn't going to anywhere else but small businesses in York County. This is probably the best chance you've had to get a grant, not a loan, for your business. And we've tried to structure this in a way that it really does support the small businesses that need the support the most in the places that need it the most, like the city of York, like Hanover, like our boroughs throughout the county. Doesn't mean that if your business isn't located in one of those places, you can't get a grant. It just means that the commissioners, the Economic Alliance, Community First Fund have all tried to create a program that really channels the funding where it's needed. So chances are, if you're on this webinar, you are one of our target businesses for this grant. Not everybody's going to get one. 750 to 1,000 grants will probably be approved through this process. We know that's only 1/10 of the businesses in the entire county that are eligible, but we hope that it'll be some of the small businesses like yours that are located, in our downtowns and our cities and our boroughs and who need it the most. So please apply. And I think Elaine's last point there in response to Jason is a good one too, that if you don't do anything else, or you don't take anything else away from this presentation, you still should go to yokostrong.org and look at the information there and sign up for the grant alerts. That's really the next step in your journey to applying for a grant.
Thank you, Silas, and we really appreciate your presentation and participation and just the wealth of information and answering the questions. We're here beyond this webinar through the application process, as Silas mentioned, and I would just say to all of you, be encouraged. Don't allow what you think may be something that's just individual to your situation to discourage you from applying. And also save the date, and we'll see you hopefully in the next business series workshop on September 16th. So thank you everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.